Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Monday's lesson, the 1st of February. Please could you write down the date and title and underline them in your homework books. Thank you. So today we are continuing with paper 2, question 3, which is the language question, which is very similar to question 2 on paper 1. By the end of the lesson today, you will analyse how writers make language choices to achieve effects, and you'll annotate an extract with what is needed to answer paper 2, question 3. Remember, if you see the pen or pause icon, that's an opportunity to stop the video and write something down. If I neglect to put them on the slide, I will always inform you when there's something that needs to be written in your books. Starting with your key vocabulary for the lesson today. So you need this key vocab because it's going to appear in our extract. If you know these words, you do not need to write them down. If you aren't sure of them, you do need to now pause the video and write them down, please. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. So today sort of ties into A Christmas Carol, some good revision for you. We're going to read a letter that was written by Charles Dickens, the author of A Christmas Carol, about visiting a ragged school. So as I've written for you here, this is excellent context revision for A Christmas Carol. So let's tell you a little bit about the source. Dickens was appalled, which means horrified, by the ragged schools, which were schools created for the poorest children to be educated. He said that they bred criminals. There was no order. It was chaotic and disorganised. Dickens strongly believed that education could help remedy poverty. So in other words, stop poverty. However, with schools like these, which were so badly run, he felt despair that poverty could ever be eased, with no proper education for the poor children in society. So hopefully you remember Ignorance in A Christmas Carol, the boy who has ignorance written on his forehead. This gives you an indication of why he's been called Ignorance. So one of the reasons is the rich often ignored the poor, hence the term ignorance. But ignorance has another meaning. It can mean ignorant, so being uneducated. So Dickens was implying in his novella A Christmas Carol that if we don't educate the poor, they're never going to escape the cycle of poverty. Right, let's get you revising question 1 quickly. You have 5 minutes to read this small extract taken from the start of this source, and you need to select the 4 true statements. Please pause your video to do that now. Thank you. Okay? Here are the statements. Let's check your answers. The correct answers were A, B, F, and H. Hopefully you got them all correct. If you didn't, take a moment to reflect on why you might not have got them wrong. What? Not wrong. Take a moment to reflect on why you may not have got them right. Okay, let's move on. So question 3 reminders. I'm not going to read this to you. It might be useful because hopefully you found some time to relax over the weekend, to remind yourselves of what question 3 entails, why it's important, what you need to remember. So if you'd like to, you can pause the video now if you've had a really enjoyable weekend at home in lockdown and can't quite remember what question 3 requires you to do. So this is optional to pause your video now. Right, hopefully you've had a read or you, like me, are ready to move on. So this is the mark scheme for question 3. When we, the examiners, so me and other teachers around the country, have this exam paper in front of us, we see 4 levels. Level 4 does not mean grade 4. It just means for this one question, if you get the highest marks, you're in that level. Now, if you don't like the blue background, here's one that's just plain black and white. However, I quite like you to see the gradient of colours because I like to use colour. So we're aiming, obviously, for 12 marks out of 12. So we need to demonstrate detailed and perceptive understanding of writers' choices. And we need to use good subject terminology and well-chosen quotes. Reminder, yes, it would like good subject terminology. So subject terminology are words like metaphor, simile, etc. But the exam board has said, please do not try and spot really difficult words like polysyndeton or Angiapolis if you have no idea what the effect is. They'd much rather you talk about the effect of a noun or an adjective than try and spot something really complicated, but then have nothing to say about it. Here's our question. How does Dickens use language to convey, which means show, the horrors of the ragged schools in London? And here is your extract. You have got 6 minutes to carefully read this extract, and then I want you to think about the language choices made by the writer to describe the school. You do not need to write anything down at this point. Just carefully read and think about which quotations you would choose. Remember the question, how does Dickens use language to convey, show the horrors, so all of the bad, negative aspects of the ragged schools in London? Please pause your video to read it now. Okay, for some of the words I thought it might be useful for you to know, I've put them into brackets for you here. So vice means wicked behaviour, and a hulk is something that definitely doesn't exist anymore. In the Victorian era, they would have prison ships. So literally a ship for prisoners which would just float in the ocean, and it's called a hulk. Now remember, I've mentioned this a lot. It needs to be ingrained in your minds. If you do not understand, let's say with my poor maths, 70% of the extract, do not panic. Skim over bits you don't understand and really hone in like a laser beam and focus on the words that you do understand. For example, just scanning through this now, imagining that I can't understand any of this, or at least can't understand 70%, I do know what the word creature means. A creature is more like an animal than a human. So looking at this word, I could say, it shows the horror of the ragged schools because the children who attend them are more like creatures than humans, suggesting in this school they don't become bettered, they don't turn out to be polite, pleasant citizens. In fact, they're almost degraded more. They become more animalistic in this school. If I look again, another word, here we go, even simpler. It's crowded. Children are huddled together. Crowd of boys. I know what a crowd is and I know what crowded means. So again, even if I don't understand all of this, I can pick out words I do understand to comment on. So it shows that it's overfilled, which is dangerous. It would breed kind of probably feelings of irritation and frustration, not to mention disease and illness. Right, let's move on. So, how do you approach question 3? Let's remind you, after your wild weekends at home, you read the extract carefully, which you should have just done. You look for ideas to support the question focus. You should have just done that. Then you pick out 4 to 5 sentences, no less, preferably no more. And by sentences, I mean quotations, that you could analyse and discuss the effect of in your answer. Then you identify if there's a technique attached to them and you analyse. And you keep in mind the focus of the question, the horror. So here's my example for you. I've selected this part of the extract. I've underlined the quotes I want to explore. Sorry about that. Go away. Hopeless nursery of ignorance, misery and vice. A breeding place for the hulks and jails. Which miserable rooms upstairs in a miserable house. So I've selected these 3. Let's show you what I do with them. So I've chosen them, so I think there's a lot I can pull out of with the words. Even better, there are techniques I can attach to them. So school is described as a nursery, that's a metaphor. He describes how it's a breeding place where things multiply for criminals. So it's a bit of hyperbole. It's also a declarative sentence, a sentence that is factual. And here we have repetition, miserable, miserable. So I've got my quotes, got my techniques, and now I'm going to look at exploding them. So here's my model example of what you need to do next. You explode your quotes. So you select keywords from them and try to think of 2 to 3 ideas or connotations. So let's talk you through this. I've started with hopeless nursery of ignorance. I've looked at the word hopeless and I've thought, oh, what does that suggest to me? Well, it can mean despair and that there's no hope or chance for these children to receive an education. But also, if something is hopeless, it can mean very bad. So this suggests the ragged schools are appalling, like truly terrible. And I've added a bit more analysis, suggesting perhaps they shouldn't even be open to the public. They're nursery of ignorance. There are two meanings of the word nursery. One, there's a preschool where you can send your children. And another meaning that you may not know is that it's a place where young plants and trees are grown. Young plants and trees are grown in a nursery. So because I've got that knowledge, I could then think to myself, so children should be able to metaphorically grow in a school, develop, by improving their education and morals. However, it's a nursery of ignorance to suggest nothing can develop or thrive to mean do well here. So just like a nursery is a place where people are meant to grow, either in preschool or like young plants and trees are meant to shoot up and develop, nothing can grow here because all it is a place of ignorance, not development. The only thing that flourishes is ignorance, and also the fact that it's like a nursery where people are crowded close together. It makes me think that it's contagious and catching. So the place sounds deadly and dangerous, more a force for evil than for good and education. Because if you picture a nursery in your mind, lots of small children running around together, it really brings to mind this idea of this contagious and catching ignorance. Okay, your turn. Here's a quotation I've selected for you. You're very welcome to choose your own, but I chose this because it's a really good one for you to explore. I've given you the key vocabulary, a reminder of what these words mean. Don't feel patronised if you see the word jail and think, of course I know that. Remember, we do have some students who English isn't a first language, so jail might not be 100% familiar to them. So if you ever do see that on my slides, don't feel patronised. If you have English as a first language and you think, what is she doing there? I've given you your task. Read the above quote, think about how the ragged schools are being described, and annotate it, just like I showed you on the previous slide. So why does he call it a breeding place? Think about that word, breeding. Why does he describe it's a place where children eventually don't become civilised humans, but instead they end up on the prison ships and jails? Once you've done that, so you're going to pause your video and spend 5 to 7 minutes on this, trying to pull anything you can, anything. Even if you think, oh, I don't think this is right or this doesn't feel clever, write it down. Build your confidence, get words on paper. I'm not there to judge you, and I wouldn't judge you anyway, because my classes have seen me made stupid mistakes before. Next one, once you've done this, I want you to try this one here. If for any reason you find the first one you've just seen a bit too tricky, this one's a little bit easier. We all know what miserable means, to be very upset. So this one might be a bit simpler if the first one's a bit too tricky to annotate. Please pause your video. Ideally, I want you to annotate them both. But if the first one's a bit tricky, try this one first instead. Please pause your video and start this now. Okay, on to Pete. Point, evidence, technique, explain or analyse. I kind of have been thinking about changing the E here, so it's Peter, because actually analyse is a better word to put here than explain, which sounds a bit basic. So you might on the next few slides see it's a Peter rather than Pete. Don't panic, I've just changed the word to analyse, because I think that's a better word to use than explain. So you should all remember Pete or Peter, and this is how we write up our answers for question 3. Let's show you an example. So you've got my P-E-T-E here. Technique, some of you will notice that it just kind of hangs loosely here. This is my technique and it's meant to be folded into this line here. But I've laid it out in this manner so you can see each part of the component of this paragraph. But when I actually write in formal exam conditions, this will be one entire paragraph. This would be part of this sentence. Please pause the video and could you write this down, and then I'd like you to try and create your own model answer. Here I've reminded you of some of my harder words. Antithesis means opposite. For example, Scrooge is the antithesis to Fred. Brilliant phrase here, dens of iniquity. It's a place of wickedness and sin. And if something is rife, unfortunately like corona, rife means everywhere. Okay, so you know your task. You're going to pause your video, Copy mine down and then try to create your own. If you feel that you're really getting the hang of this and actually would rather make your own, please make your own instead. Pause your video now. And the lesson is complete for today. Well done, everybody. I've started to include some images now to remind you you're all climbing your own personal mountains, overcoming your own issues of, having to work from home and manage your siblings or help guardians or parents. You're doing so well. We are so proud of you. It makes my morning every time I see you uploading work, and the amount of writing you're doing is exceptional. We know it's hard. We know you're tired, but you have to keep providing evidence that you're working from home. We don't know what the future holds, so make sure you are supporting yourself by providing evidence. So, by the end of the lesson today, you should now be able to analyse how writers make language choices to achieve effects and annotate and extract with what you just did for question 3 of Language Paper 2. I'll see you for tomorrow's lesson. Have a lovely rest of your day.